All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for this webinar today. We are very excited about our new webinar series. We have discussed a lot of interesting topics, but today we have one that is something we've been thinking about and have been asked about quite a bit here at Moonshine University when this pandemic broke out, particularly when ACSA started um, doing polls and putting some numbers together of projections of distilleries closing, and the financial institutes had low interest rates, and all these things were changing in a really drastic way. And I reached out to the delightful, bombastic Scott Schiller, and to kind of talk through what the reality was going to be like. And after we were chatting about this for a little while, we decided to why not make this little conversation a webinar, because there's so many people out there who want to know what the landscape is right now and what it's probably going to look like as things continue to sally forth. So we're very fortunate to have Scott Schiller here from Thoroughbred Spirits Group today to really talk through what's happening in the industry and what it's looking like is potentially going to happen moving forward. Scott, thank you so much for being here and making time and putting this presentation together for all of us. And I'm going to hand it over to you now.
It's my pleasure, Colin. Thank you for that. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for people on the other side of the world. Sincere pleasure to speak to you and talk about this very interesting and unique time that we're all super cognizant of. I have one core objective, and that's just to share my insight about what's going on. I know many of you are thinking about it, starting a distillery, perhaps already halfway through or just about to open. And perhaps there's a few that are already in business. And so again, strictly just to be helpful, share these insights. And for those who are thinking about it or on the pathway or in it, giving you some things to think about through on how to press all the way forward. So opening distillery post-pandemic, the key thing there is we don't know when this is going to end and to what degree things are going to be at the current, what I'll say, challenge rate. And a lot of this is important to know from my viewpoint that I'm a really conservative forecaster. The reason is that this is an extremely risky industry, and I like to be able to hedge and plan for success. So when you're looking at some of these things, if you're hearing some negativity in my voice, not all a negative person, I'm actually quite a positivist. But again, coming from the perspective that this is a challenging segment, and these are very, very difficult times for everybody and every segment of the industry, you might notice some doom and gloom. So on that happy note, to share with you a real perspective of the industry and how that should influence your path forward. Again, the traditional ways of how you would have built a brand or how we would create a business for our clients is different now. The rules have completely changed literally overnight. And so this should influence your plan. And then for those of you who are in this pathway of getting started or just about to start, this is an excellent time to double check your math and double check your theory. So hopefully from this, you'll gain some interesting insights to implement and think through. Just to give you a super brief background on who we are and the perspective, Thoroughbred Spirits Group, we are a little over a decade old. We help put all the pieces together for spirit companies. We're a team of 18 individuals that cover everything from finance, business development, packaging design, master distiller, liquid development, and strategic advisory. I share this so that you know where we're coming from. And over the last decade, we've helped build 30 physical distilleries, designed over 50 brands, and have brought 3 companies to exit. And a lot of our work is everything from husband and wife teams who have gotten started to large conglomerates who are looking to get into the spirit space. So again, all this insight from all these different aspects, not only from our US operations, but also from our international and UK businesses, we have a lot of insight. And I want to share with you some of those learnings and insights from here on. So agenda, just 3 big topic points in the industry landscape. pre and post pandemic. So you can see what was happening before this happened just recently, and now what we're experiencing in real time today. What this means for unique opportunities, and from that, what might be the path forward and going forward in your plans for opening a distillery. So a couple of things, industry insights, looking at the on-trade, off-trade, distributors, retailers, and of course, suppliers. So I want to walk you through how all of this is interconnected. And the on-trade, as we know, is closed down in most states. And those that are operating at 50% capacity, 25% capacity were closed for months on end. And restaurants have one of the highest failure rates of any businesses. And part of that is because there's not a lot of barriers to entry. And if a concept doesn't work out, you can close it and move on and trade. And so in the on-trade, the closure rates are already starting to be quite extensive. And for those that aren't closing, the likelihood that they'll declare bankruptcy or try and recollateralize is extensive. I'll show you why that's important in a minute. But from an actual outlet perspective, our customers are literally going away, and the speed at which they would recover and come back is likely to be quite slow, simply because the amount of capital it takes to restart and the ability to raise funds in this environment. You have to have some incredible history and a very unique concept in order to get capital to invest in a restaurant now. Assuming you are open, the consumer experience and the confidence they have in enjoying and dining out, part of what we do in the craft segment or artisan spirit is really build experiences and unique flavors. And when you have to have a mask and you have to wait 20 minutes to get a drink, or you have to eat it outside or drink it outside in a pitcher of plastic, it's not the same thing. And so those environments and those unique, bars and restaurants that people would delight in our cocktails, that's gone away. And the other big thing on the on-trade is LMF, which stands for legal marketing funds, which is definitely a marketing term. But the perspective is that with all these restrictions in travel, the large conglomerates already had a war chest. They have a massive one now. So as soon as bars and restaurants do start to come back, they will start unleashing these LMFs, which means the local restaurant that used to support all local products and establishments, et cetera, are going to be extra tempted to take on funds from these conglomerates, because being $10,000 to be on a drink menu, that's going to pay their rent for 2 months. That's going to help get them out of debt faster. So the amount of competition and dollars that are going to be extended towards these groups is going to be quite extensive. Switching to the off-trade, as we know, off-trade is up. It's not completely offsetting the on-trade. So while you may see similar numbers or off-trade businesses up, the profitability that comes from on-trade is much greater to distributors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what's happening is that the on-trade buys typically in most markets or states 1 liter bottle sizes. Those 1 liter bottle sizes are stuck. They're either at the distributor or at the bar and restaurant. So what you're starting to see is distributors are offering 1 liter bottle sizes to the off-trade at the same price of a $7.50. So in some markets, you're starting to see Tito's 1 liter trade at the same price as the Tito $7.50. And the problem with that is that even if, as a local distillery, we're trying to offer, or we're even a few dollars more, now not only are we a few dollars more, but the buying power is 25% of a greater deal if they buy the national brand. So you're starting to see some leaders sneak into the marketplace and offer that greater pricing. Greater leverage. The off-trade knows how desperate suppliers are to find an outlet. So their margins are starting to squeeze the suppliers. They're starting to demand support, whether it's through marketing or free goods or trades. Again, every state is different, has different laws. But again, the same rule applies, is that suppliers have money to spend, and they're putting that money where people can physically buy. So the off-trade retailer themselves has much greater leverage than they did just a few months ago. And lastly, the traditional marketing, whether it's in-store samplings or, promos, those are all gone. Many states don't want additional people inside their store, not to mention physically handing out liquid samples of something. So on trade, you have extensive closure rates, which are going to, certainly drive down the amount of outlets that things can go. And then in the off trade, greater power and greater restrictions. Distributors. For anybody who've heard me chat before, I always believe that distributors are our customers, because it is. While we always talk about the end consumer, the reality is our customer is a distributor. And distributors, for the first time, are in real trouble, no matter how large or small they are. So here's essentially what's happening. Pre-COVID, many of the imported wines had an extra tax placed on them. And so many of your smaller distributors are very wine focused and very on-premise focused. So they were already anemic going into this. Now you add on to the fact of COVID with your on-premise accounts disappearing and your premium products certainly being whacked a little bit. The small to mid-tier distributors are in financial trouble, extensive financial trouble. And what that means is that the larger ones are having even greater success of replacing their brands. And we've even seen some deals where a smaller mid-tier distributor has a coveted wine brand or a large wine brand that does most of their volume. They're being poached by the larger ones because the larger ones have the capital in order to pay for any inventory that's sitting there or any invoices that are outstanding. So now you're starting to see these small and mid-tier companies really start to come apart. And that is important because they, one, added competition, but it also gave the opportunity for more brands to compete. Because with one or two key distributors in a marketplace, if there's not competition, you're starting to see the larger brands continue to add pressure and restrict alternative solutions. And with that, conglomerates are getting extensive focus, whether that's in the large tier or the small tier distributor. And the reason is that when you're trying to sell anything to allow revenue to come in, it's important that you're going to get paid. And so when these large conglomerates are trying to focus, they want to make sure that the big brands that their bonuses depend upon and their mortgages depend upon are going to be there. So even if they like the smaller brands or the smaller brands were providing greater profit or were doing respectable revenue, they're not purchasing them. They're not purchasing them because either they are tied up with cash themselves, they're cash strapped, or they don't want the accounts to have the alternative option of buying more products. We know of several companies that are not getting their product replaced even though they're out of stock. And because the distributor doesn't want to tie up cash, and they've literally said, we do not want to have alternative prices to take somebody away from buying our conglomerate brand when there's a small brand opportunity. So your own customer in that exact situation is limiting your opportunity for growth or frankly, survival. I think from this, you're going to have even greater consolidation. We're down to just a handful, but these are incredible economic blows. And so this mid-tier independents, I think, are going to have to really get smart. And lastly, the brand grabs. If you're a well-respected, independent, coveted brand, and you're thinking that your distributor network may not even be intact after this period, you are certainly exploring your options because you need to think about your revenue as well. So brand grabs with the larger companies, again, poaching, reaching out, offering, safe haven from these mid-tier and smaller companies is already starting to happen. Okay. And now for us, suppliers. So the conglomerates, I've referenced it before, but they have a war chest. Not only are they having, frankly, a banner year, they're also a lot more profitable. These companies spend millions upon millions of dollars in travel and entertainment. It's been practically zero for all intents and purposes. So while they're still making all their shipment numbers, their profitability is much greater. In addition, on-premise as a supplier is a much more anemic spend, much more anemic profit. So all the ancillary legal marketing funds and strategic and tactical budgets that they'd normally have to put in place to support the on-premise has been non-existent. So they really are in a great spot. They're also placing greater pressure on their distributor partners, right? So again, we know, and it's common knowledge that larger suppliers will often put pressure on distributors to limit or restrict brands from growing, but now they have even more reason to do so, simply because they can point to some of the younger companies and say, hey, they may not even be in business in 6 months to a year. So why are you going to look to build a brand that may not be here when we've been with you for 50 years and certainly here for the long term? Also starting to see now, we have a couple of clients, unfortunately, that are looking to exit, and the valuations that are being offered are significantly lower than they were a few months ago. One, it's hard to invest full value in an anemic company, but at the same time, the overall mindset and appetite for valuation is much lower. On the mid-tier, I think it's going to be a wait it out and see, or they're going to start to partner and form alliances. Certainly, we've seen lots of acquisition appetite of mid-tier brands, even though they were owned by a conglomerate. That perspective of floating in the middle, companies that I'll say do maybe 200 to 400,000 cases, they're in a really weird spot because they're strong enough to survive, a 12-month storm, if you will, but they're certainly going to go backwards in their strength and focus. So mid-tier is in a very vulnerable spot in terms of how they're going to grow forward or be knocked back. And then lastly, where most of our participants today probably sit is in the craft or artisan's perspective. I take no pride in saying when we're about to share. To give you guys a little background, I've owned 2 distilling companies. My first one didn't work out. My second one did. So I have immense respect for entrepreneurs, and I have incredible apathy and empathy for those who are going through these tough times. And unfortunately, in many cases, there's nothing you can do about it. So no matter how smart you are or how great your brand is, your hands are literally tied from being able to grow and to solve problems. So again, just before I go into this, I want it to be really well known that I take no pride in sharing this. But here's what I do know, and here's what we see. From this movement, there's going to be far less competition. Some of that, COVID is actually forcing their hands. There are businesses that realistically were going to shut down the next year or two, but COVID is forcing their hand. Businesses that were going along by having a strong, successful on-premise, essential bar that sold packaged goods to go, done. The ability to recover that revenue anytime soon is going to be slim to none. And so if a brand was really focused within its 4 walls, the ability to grow beyond that, reposition, retarget, as well as to gain distribution and make up all that revenue, that's a big pill to try and swallow. So unfortunately, I think there's going to be far less competition within the next 6 to 12 months. In addition, from that distribution difficulty, distributors are really, really concerned about taking on new brands, as well as locking up cash within those brands. So attaining distribution, growing distribution is next to impossible right now. We have another business, which is called The Collective, which manages 6 brands in the marketplace. One of those brands was delisted. That brand did several hundred cases a month and spent north of $500,000 a year in just above the line marketing. And the reason they got delisted is that they didn't see the long-term pathway for the growth of the brand. So getting distribution for that brand is what we had to struggle with during COVID. It was next to impossible. And this is a big brand. And the perspective is even the people who make decisions are even furloughed at the moment. So not only can they not get a phone call back, the people who make the decisions aren't physically working. And they're not likely to come back, by the way, until August, September. You're going to see even tighter localization. So as brands, lose funding or lose the ability to travel, focusing on their home market, places that they can cover and get into their car and drive around. And so what that means is the local fight or the local card is going to get even more intense. And trying to focus on where you're at and where you're growing is often going to be by your local zip code. So what does that mean is for the mid-tier brands or the brands that were already well distributed throughout the country, it's actually a positive because often one of the impediments to a regional or national brand from growing is the amount of localization, right? And, when it comes to, I'll just say, a hypothetical vodka brand that's $20. And let's say that brand's from California trying to sell in Illinois. And they go up against an Illinois brand. They said, well, hey, I'm local and I'm $20. And they said, by the way, our kids play baseball together, right? And so you're constantly fighting on not the merits of the brand or the price, but on the localization. And so that's been a big impediment for brands trying to scale. But for those that are pulling back, fighting amongst or aggressive competition within local distillers is likely to increase. I also think you're going to see greater customization. There's a project that we work on that they basically blend custom whiskeys together for individuals, and single barrel programs are really gaining momentum, and that's the offering something different that the larger companies aren't doing. So focusing on the customers you have and offering more value to them. So going deeper within those existing relationships and making something special with them. And I want to caution, I don't want someone to interpret that language as, hey, you should make custom spirits for every account, but doing something a little above the norm. Maybe that barrel program or that, classic teaching of a cocktail program or something of that nature, but going deeper with the business you already have. And of course, we're all seeing greater opportunities for direct to consumer, whether that's through Drizzly, whether in some states allowing for open containers, or even direct shipment from the distillery. But all this is suffice to say is that the bar has been raised, and I'm going to talk about that. And what I mean is that 10 years ago, you could start a craft distillery, have somewhat okay product, somewhat okay experience, and several $100,000. Over the years, as more competition has come about, that all those elements of success have been raised and raised and raised. But with COVID, this is going to be catapulted. Now you have to be extra well funded. You have to have incredible resources. You have to have longevity and the ability to travel and to withstand all these pressures. And you have to have a brand value that is super enticing to the distributor, because they are going to be incredibly reticent to invest and take on new brands. So from this, what it has done is make the competition and the standards that much more difficult. So I'm grateful that it doesn't look like half of you have hung up. So I'll pause here for a second. We will do a Q&A at the end of this. But Colin, I don't know if you wanted to pause or if there's something you want to add.
So we do have a question that came in. What would your advice be to a hospitality student wanting to enter the beverage side of the industry? So I think it's more from the employment view, beyond just being out in the marketplace, as someone who is currently getting educated and wants to enter this space. What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's so much uncertainty right now, and I know many establishments have restricted staffing, and they're certainly trying to get as much of their current staff back to any bit of capacity. My initial reaction to that is to focusing on something that perhaps is more logic focused or has other perspectives beyond just a dedicated restaurant focus. So if you went to like a luxury hotel, something that maybe had a food and beverage component but had other reasons for them to be open, I think those are probably some of the few establishments that are actively looking to hire at the moment. But I think it would be more challenging to find a job where they already have an existing staff that's perhaps half furloughed.
And then we have another question on a different topic on distributors. Can distributors deny taking on your product? If so, what is your recourse, especially if your state is the distributor?
Yeah, it's a great question. Jim is referring to open states and control states. So in an open market, they don't have to do anything. And it's a really tragic story what happened to this brand. But they don't. And unless you have in your contract, guaranteed minimums, which most small to mid-tier brands don't have the ability to negotiate, there's nothing. And look, distributors I think are very necessary for many reasons, but they are not beholden to you. They definitely have the power in the relationship. When it comes to a control state, they as well do not have to grant you the access. They will often look out for their local or in-state suppliers, but they necessarily won't carry every product, or they won't give you full distribution in the stores. Also, in a state like Michigan, they do have thresholds. So if you're not moving X amount of volume, the brand does get delisted. But typically in a control state, every state has their own little acronym for it, but SLO, or specialty listing outlet, or specialty listing item, which allows you to directly sell to that retail account, or the on-premise account actually purchases it and pulls it through the system. But the state itself does not have to grant you that opportunity.
And following up with a control state question, Chuck asks, how do you see the current environment affecting a starting distillery in a control state, especially one with low initial overhead?
Yeah, I love control states, especially if the distillery was in that control state. Again, many control states are great at supporting in-state producers, not so much out-of-state producers, but that's okay, makes sense. And from that, in a market which is predominantly off-premise driven, I actually think it's a really good thing. I think of all times right now with the control state, just for everyone's benefit, because I know there's some people from overseas and not familiar with the U.S. system. Basically, the state controls the physical distribution. Sometimes they own the stores, sometimes the stores are independent, but essentially they control how product gets out there. And in that environment, let's just take a state like Ohio. They can physically say the distribution will be in X stores. So you can literally overnight be in 300 stores. Now, the challenge with that is making sure it pulls through, but having to negotiate with one, not having to deal with a distributor per se, and two, getting that distribution, especially in times where it's hard to make sales pitches. Control states are definitely where our brands are experiencing greater performance at the moment.
Great. And then one last question in our queue before we continue on. Do you see these trends as short to medium term forces? What changes do you think are longer term, say 2 to 5 years?
It's a great question. I think these trends, I think the bar is permanently raised, which in sincere respect in some ways is a good thing. But in terms of this is going to be a really long recovery for things to start to turn. The on-premise is just decimated. And the confidence, even for the really savvy operators in the restaurant world, to want to reopen a restaurant, I think it's going to be a while. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would say it's at least 2021 is going to be bumpy. And it's not until 2022 where things start to normalize a bit. And that, of course, is with the massive caveat that, the health situation improves. But gaining and raising capital, starting a new restaurant in this environment, from the restaurateurs that we deal with, they are incredibly concerned. One of our distillery clients is a restaurant operator that owns 18 restaurants. They're closing 12 of them and are just going to, limit to where they're focusing on. So think about, just a smart, savvy, incredibly well-funded group they basically threw in the towel for over 60% of their group. And that's not everybody, but again, the ability to recover anytime in the short term is small. But the rosy side, the good side, that's what I'm just about to talk about next with the opportunities. So let's call it post 18 months, post 2 years.
All right, and a couple more questions came in, and we'll just address these two before moving on. Jim asks, will a control state distribute overseas?
No, they're strictly in state.
And then our own Tyler Gomez. Hello, Tyler.
Hey, Tiger.
With the numerous restrictions with on-site visits, how would you tackle creating a new consumer experience? Is there an effective way to scratch that itch virtually?
There is. And, part of when we build a financial model, so much of the initial profit is driven in the beginning years of on-site sales. And often it's, how do we create and increase the capacity? How do we get more throughput? But in this environment where you are restricted, this is the classic entrepreneurial thing, is work with what you have, with not what you don't have. So focus on your opportunities, not your restrictions. And so if you are restricted, to say in groups of 10 or only, 20 people in your establishment at a time, that is an awesome opportunity to really wow and create a really customized experience. So the way I challenge and what we propose to our clients is, think about what would be if money's no issue, and time is no issue, and staff is no issue, what would be the ultimate custom personalized experience you would make for 5 of your best friends to experience your distillery? And when you frame it that way, that'd be like, oh, well, I would, have our master distiller, walk them through. I would make sure that they had a private area to experience the tasting. I'd make sure that I personally walked with them through the rick house. We would sit out on the back patio and have a lunch together. Awesome. When you start thinking those ways of how you really create that emotional connection with your brand, part of what happens when businesses grow is they lose that, right? Because there's too many people. It's too crowded. I have to get too many people come in here. I'm leaving money on the table by only offering 10 seats versus my establishment seating 50. So coming up with custom programs for that small amount or whatever your restrictions are, and then putting the appropriate value on that, right? So you can have less people, but make the same amount of revenue, or more importantly, the same amount of profit. And you can do that because the itch is also true for the consumer, right? They want to get out of their house. They want to experiment something, but they want to be safe. So if you said to me, hey, three of my buddies and I can go and have a custom experience for $50 a person at your distillery, and I'm going to spend 2 or 3 hours there, that's worth it, because I'm no longer interested in going to see 5 distilleries a day or 6 distilleries a day and then going to 3 bars. My safety and my confidence to be able to experience, I want to go to 1 or 2, and I want to make sure that experience is well planned out and meaningful. So again, I think this is a very, very unique opportunity for brands that really have that ability to customize and really sell what the ultimate experience would be. Cool. All right. Going into opportunities. So if you're on the fence, we're thinking about it, looking at starting a distillery, there's a couple of things to be thinking through. One, there are many distilleries on the market, whether publicly or unpublicly. And so looking at a full acquisition of an existing company versus starting your own, again, the values of these businesses is certainly diminished. This is one of the few industries that typically trades on a revenue multiple, anywhere from 6 to 9x, net revenue multiple, by the way. Those numbers have been brought down by 2 to 3 points. Also, depending on how cash strapped the business is, the valuation may be even lower. And if you're not interested in the full business, you can maybe look at brands. Maybe there's a liqueur brand or a whiskey brand that somebody's willing to sell versus the entire portfolio. So looking at strategically, maybe I just want to buy their certain label, not the whole distillery. That's a difficult conversation if it's a branded house, but that's a discussion for another time. You can also look at aging inventory. Our desk is flooded right now with emails that are coming up with, hey, we have excess inventory. People are not eating their forecast, so they're trying to offload any inventory. So this is a way to perhaps buy some aged inventory that may be anywhere from 6 to 5 years old, and give you a jump start on what you're already doing. We are starting to see some equipment come available. I will caution you that most of what's on the market currently is rather subpar, not this type of stuff that you're perhaps want to move. But that is going to start to happen as these businesses become, unfortunately, more and more desperate. Stills are something that have incredible value to many people and remain a good portion of their value. So saving 10 to maybe even 30% on your equipment costs are start to going to see. In addition, maybe the brands aren't any good, the inventory sucks, and they don't have any distribution, but they have all their licenses and they have a nice facility. So, buying the physical asset and the licenses and registration that come along with that, you can look at it that way. And then one of the challenges for this industry is talent. Distillers, heads of sales, et cetera, operations personnel. There's a lot of talent that's starting to come available, and talent that is also reaching out to try and find new opportunities because they know the cash position of their businesses that they work for currently, and they're open for new opportunities. So some of the perspectives here on what this means from the company or person that's looking to get into the business or looking to grow their business, the whole gamut is array. And as of the roughly 3,000 licenses, shy of 2,000 active, conservatively, there's between 300 or 400 companies that are in one of these positions here.
Where would one tie into a network of those looking to offload aging inventories?
Yeah, you're welcome to send me an email, but there's a company called JB Toman Company out of Florida. They're the largest bulk vendor. I would shoot an email to them with what you have available. I think it's bulkspirits.com, and they are the best at moving inventory around.
Just came in. Not to beat on this, but how do you get product overseas in a control state? Is it not possible?
Well, I think if I understand Jim's question, you can sell in any other state. The first I interpreted your question was, would the control state do it for you? But as a distillery, and let's just say Ohio, you can work with an importer in the UK and ship directly to them, but the state itself will not help or restrict you from doing so.
So I think another way to say that is the onus is on you to set up your international sales and where you're going to be distributing to internationally. And then Paul has a follow-up question to the talent portion of this slide. What are some of the best ways to find good talent right now?
Yeah. We do a lot of hiring of top-level individuals. Some of that is through just relationships and network. If you're looking to post something, ADI's website has a pretty good job board, and that would be a good place to start. Cool.
Term viability of cooperation between non-competing producers regionally, distilleries, breweries, and wine producers, etc.
It's awesome. One of the things I love about this business, while it is a competitive industry, it's a very respectful industry, and there's in most individuals tends to be a really care and concern for mutual success and growth. And so certainly, pooling resources together, being a co-op, sharing a sales team, et cetera, is good in theory. With all things of that nature, the devils are in the detail. I always like to joke when someone says, hey, 3 entrepreneurs are going to start a business together with their own businesses. It's incredibly tough because everyone has their own objectives. And it's a joke because in college, I was asked by my professor to start an entrepreneurship club. I said, great, 50 individuals trying to do something in the same direction won't happen. But there are ways to do it. It's best to look at things that are non-directly competitive. There needs to be a similar mindset in terms of values and standards, and also that the brands play well together. We've seen some situations where our distillery client will like to make single malt, and they'll work with a local brewer, even investing in equipment at the local brewer. We have shared resources on sales teams. Again, we started a company ourselves that is a dedicated sales team that represents a small selection of brands. So they, quote unquote, share the sales resources. So you can do it, but just make sure that a lot of those independent things are really aligned, and so that the strength of the group is much better than the individuals. And also, goes without saying, making sure that the wind down is pre-thought out, because unfortunately those things rarely last long term. Keep that. All right, and just to clarify, some of these questions you're asking are much more detailed, and obviously I'd like to give more thought to. I'll share my email address at the end if you'd like to email or follow up with something directly or something more personal or private. Happy to respond. Again, just want to be helpful. Okay, so with all this great information, what would be the path forward? You need to ask yourself 4 questions. Is this a passion, an investment, or a hobby? And the reality is that if this is a hobby or just a pure investment at the moment, now's not the time to do it. And frankly, if a hobby was your answer in the first place, we always discourage those entrepreneurs from moving forward. But if this is a true and passion and you have this investment to move forward, you are willing to do what it takes. And you're also in a unique position right now to perhaps, one, enter in a place where there's less competition when you do finally arrive, or use your ability to invest or purchase a distillery at a discounted rate. Asking yourself what success looks like. This is the first question we ask every person we work with. What does this mean to you? Where do you want to take the business? If this is, hey, I'm looking to slow down on my workload, I just want to work with my hands, now is not the time to enter. This is an incredibly challenging time at the moment. But if this is, hey, I am looking at this long term, I'm intrigued by the fact that it actually will be less competitive down the road, and I have a long-term horizon, and I am willing to be dedicated to this business, now is an excellent time to look at it, because by the time you actually launch, a lot of this will be past us. And then, am I willing to do what it takes? If I was operating in today's environment, would I shudder? Would I be emboldened? How would I be acting if I was in command of a distillery today? And lastly, the most importantly, can I stomach the downside? What happens if this pandemic extends for another 2 years? Do I have enough capital? Am I at risk? If my on-premise or on-site sales, which are massively important for a startup distillery, doesn't ever come back, can I get through that, right? And the biggest thing that we never want to see someone do is risk their personal fortune or personal, funds that would pay for your children's college or your mortgage payments. So this last one is probably the first one in many ways. But if you can answer these 4 questions and have the confidence and actually look at the potential of the opportunity, despite all the doom and gloom I gave you, here's how you move forward. This is our go, no go process. We do this for every single project we work on. We first start out with a feasibility study. We study the finances. It's the least sexiest thing we do, but in Excel, I can't write, I'm going to sell a lot of product or make something good. You need to plan out exactly what your portfolio is. What are your price points, right? One of the things I didn't touch on is price sensitivity and consumer confidence index, right? Because this presentation would go on for 5 hours and I've already depressed half of you. But the ability to restrict price points. So what you're seeing is in products that are above $50, are just getting destroyed because the consumer confidence to experiment or try things that are $50 plus, those were known as trophy bottles or bottles that were, once a quarter experimenters. But the products that were between 25 and 45, those are the ones that got traction and still get traction in today's environment. So planning out this portfolio of different price points, as well as what markets may or may not open, how much of your business will be on-premise versus off-premise, planning everything out, and then putting in perspectives that allow you to discount your projections or increase your projections. That's the first step. Plan this out numerically, make sure it makes sense. If you're comfortable with those numbers and you can, be comfortable and stomach the risk, then we start doing some fun stuff. This is when we develop the brand, the packaging, the logos, all the look, and then we start on liquid, right? We start developing the liquid, the flavor profiles, our age, our price points. Perhaps we've acquired some aged inventory or a liqueur or something like that from an existing distillery. Perhaps we buy that inventory and actually blend it in with our younger stuff that we intend, or maybe we just repackage it, remarket it. And last, when you have a physical package design, the prototype comp, you fill it with the liquid that you want to try, you market test. Have a conversation with the distributor. Will they even call you back? Or, hey, this is great, but we're not interested in carrying products that are above $40. Can you get to $39.99? Hey, this is a really interesting portfolio, but given your marketing plan of support and number of sales personnel, we don't feel you're the right fit for us. And so you have that true feedback before you spend the real money, right? Before you go forward and build a distillery or buy a plant or buy equipment. You walk through all these processes, and depending on your feedback, you of course make tweaks, but you've done everything that you can realistically do. You know your numbers, you know what it looks like, you know what it tastes like, and you know what people think about and the opportunity for it to be sold. At that stage, you've done your homework for yourself or for a potential investor to move forward or not. So again, 4-stage process, but the cool thing is that all this stuff should take time. And there's no better time like the present to be thinking through these ideas, right? Because you're not rushed. And all of this is a creative process. So as you're doing this homework, even if you decide to do this work and then shelf it for 6 months because the economy is not right, none of this is wasted. You just waited. But then once the economy is right, or the right brand comes available for sale, or the right opportunity, or the on-premise comes back, you're ready to go. And again, I'm willing to guess, unfortunately, that many of your competitors are not going to be around. So the opportunity for growth of a true scale business, whether you started 6 months ago versus a year and a half from now, are likely to be far greater. So key success factors in any time, but again, especially right now, these businesses have to be well-funded. Many of the distilleries that are the most hurt never allowed for a rainy day or just allowed for a hockey stick growth. You need to allow for not only the downside, but the upside, because as opportunities start to present themselves, the companies that are willing to come to market and spend are going to get the attention of the accounts and are going to get the attention of the distributor. So every business is different, but now more than ever, you have to be well-funded and coming out of the gate. Industry know-how, the ability for brands to make mistakes, not know pricing and programming, not be professional in their design, not understand how the real route to market works. Distributors just aren't going to put up with it. If you don't come with proper talent and proper resources and proper know-how, you're not even going to get a meeting. And the niceties, and I mean this in the greatest way of, hey, we've never done this before. Can we have a meeting to talk about pricing? They're not going to do it because the risk of them taking on a new brand that isn't perhaps well-funded and doesn't know what they're doing, they're not going to invest any resources in it. Unique position, the consumer, again, going back to some economic stuff, the consumer confidence index. There's a lot of brands that offer and say the same exact thing. So now you really have to have a point of differentiation. You can't just use the local card. You can't just say, well, hey, we're grain to glass. Really having a unique position and a unique experience are absolutely critical. How am I going to break through the clutter? What is going to make somebody invest in a brand new brand? Before I was doing it because I wanted to experiment. Now it has to be something meaningfully unique for me to get there. Excellent product and packaging. This has kind of been in place for a long time, but the liquid has to be there and the packaging, because the demand and the competition is going to be far greater. And lastly, thinking beyond the still. This is a phrase that I learned from my grandfather, who was a distiller. And he taught me early on that this was a commercial business. This is a marketing-based industry. And for the companies that were unfortunately obsessed with just their still or the area within their four walls, their bar, their retail, or their product, and didn't focus on the route to market or didn't look to build new markets of distribution, they're going to have a real tough time expanding today. So we'll pause, go back through some more Q&A for another 10 minutes.
Yep, and we already have a few in the queue here. So James asks, I am out of Houston. Would you suggest opening a micro distillery in 2021-22 over this year?
Texas, very affectionately, is crazy. There are Texas distilleries that are performing astronomically well. That is a loyal state. And when we know the numbers of several distilleries because of clients and projects, but Texas is an outlier. The ability to support and grow that market. Houston, a great city and kind. I don't know if there is a bad time at the moment to launch in Texas.
All right. So Andy asks, are you seeing the decline in trophy bottles greater than $50 in all spirits categories? Seems like the bourbon market has a lot of higher priced offerings and still growing.
Yeah, it's up until recently that was very true. But the even the coveted whiskey brands are starting to see things show up a little bit. Again, it depends on what state you're in and what market. If you're referring to stuff from Sazerac, that's really controlled. But the upper echelon stuff, Angel's Envy, etc., that stuff is starting to sit a little bit. And it's nothing to do with those brands. They're all great brands. It's just the ability to buy those trophy bottles is diminished, and that's not because of interest. It's just consumer confidence index.
All right. Brian asked, if you are someone who doesn't have the benefit of the friends and family style capital raising, what is the best way to approach potential investors, or how do I find them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So normally there's the 4 Fs, which is the friends, family, schools, and fanatics. So you mentioned the first 2 were out. So the key thing is going back to the go, no go plan. And the reason we do that is many of our clients raise money. Very few of them have all the capital themselves. And so you need to do everything a real legitimate, keyword legitimate investor wants to know. They want to know your numbers. They want to know what it looks like, what it tastes like, and what other people think about it. And so doing that homework first and really refining your concept, then you have something tangible to show them. In terms of finding networks, there are angel investor networks. Typically what we find is somebody knows somebody. This is a super sexy category. So getting meetings or getting interest in the idea tends to not be that difficult, but getting the right person to the meeting is the difficult part, because this isn't a common investment, right? If you're opening up a real retail center, that's a deal that many people have seen. The numbers are very straightforward, how you invest and what you look for returns, but these aren't common investments. So it takes a long time, but coming prepared and meeting the individuals that tend to be independent entrepreneurs, like what I'll refer to as the limelight, somebody who has a convertible tends to be the type of individuals, but you got to come prepared. Without that, the chance of raising capital is slim to none.
And coming in through the chat instead of questions, we have a question that is a good follow-up to that. What do you think about using SBA 7A loans for financing a startup distillery? assuming a strong business plan?
Awesome. We have multiple projects that have done the 7A. You got to do your homework again, which we do, but that's a program that's garnered a lot of interest. We've also had local grants put anywhere from 250 to 2 million into a plan. So if you have the personal wherewithal to do that, love that program.
All right, and then coming through the questions here, we have two people asking about what you think of opening in various states. One is any insights on Montana, opening a distillery in Montana.
Yeah, Montana's a beautiful state. It's a controlled market. It's a smaller market in terms of physical volume. So typically, if you were able to be in an environment which would have a lot of throughput, that's often the perspective that would get that business off the ground. So I don't know if that is the best business to start today, but planning for that business in time, I think would make good sense, depending on where you're geographically located. But depending strictly on in-state sales, I think there's some other states I'd look at first.
And with another state question is, any thoughts on Georgia? And a second part to this question, are aged spirits a must-have for new distilleries?
Yeah. Well, I lived in Atlanta. I met my wife in Atlanta. My church is in Atlanta, so I have a great admiration for Georgia. So Georgia is a great market, and we've got 2 projects going in there now, and I'm super excited for both of them because there's not a lot of competition in Georgia, and Georgia is a top-tier market. They are loyal. There's a lot of consumption, and you're also in a stone's throw of 2 other great markets of Florida and South Carolina. So depending on physically where in Georgia, I'm a big fan of Georgia. And then the other question was, do you need to have aged spirits? It depends on the rest of your portfolio and the brand. The consumer is looking for aged spirits. How you go about offering those aged spirits is where the finesse is. Would I launch with one without it? Again, it depends on the portfolio. Would I much prefer to have something aged? Yeah. And again, that's a deeper question, but yeah.
And since we only have 1 minute left, we're going to end with, which is a nice tee up for you, Scott. What might be the range of going rates for a full consultation process for opening a distillery?
Oh, is that my mom? I'm happy to address that personally. You're welcome to send me an email afterwards. I'm happy to discuss it with you, but yeah.
All right. And just to be cognizant of time, I do want to wrap up here at 1 p.m. If you do have any more questions or I missed questions in the chat along the way, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Colin at moonshineuniversity.com, or directly to Scott with any questions. Is your email on the last slide?
I think it is. It might be. So here's my information. This is our general email. It will get to me. But my personal one, if you'd like to write out directly, it's my initials, SS. So ss@tbspirits.com. And just a last personal note, I'm really grateful that you all turned in. I truly hope this was helpful and allows you to think through the ideas here. Again, I'm very bullish on this industry. The spirits industry is proven now more than ever that it's recession resilient, not resistant, but resilient. And the opportunity of some of our clients having banner years is very encouraging, not only from your own investment, but from potential investors coming into this space. There's very, very few industries that can say that.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time and all the info. This was very, very insightful. A lot to think about. And again, for those of you who might be harping on some of the aspects that seemed a little more heavy, also just think about all the opportunities that are going to come out of this new changing environment. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us. And Scott, thank you again for a fantastic presentation with great info.
My pleasure. Thank you all very much.
All right. Bye, everybody.